To match the engine, the XT6 suspension has also been reworked.
They looked boring, sounded tame, and vanished without a trace. But these forgotten sleeper cars from the 1980s could blow the doors off anything at a red light. How did we let the fastest secrets of our youth fade into obscurity like they never mattered? The Buick Regal Grand National was not supposed to be fast. It was supposed to be a cushy, respectable ride for golf dads and business lunches. But then Buick did something wild. They dropped in a turbocharged V6 engine that transformed this quiet cruiser into a tire-shredding menace. In the 1980s, it was faster than many Ferraris. That is not hyperbole. The blacked-out exterior, understated badging, and boxy silhouette made it blend in with traffic like any other mid-tier sedan. But under the hood was a different story. By the time you hit 60 miles per hour, the Grand National had already left muscle cars and sports coupes gasping for air. Even the top-tier Grand National GNX variant made jaws drop. And yet, most people never noticed one until it smoked them off the line. No loud exhaust, no flashy spoiler, just brutal performance in a tuxedo. Car magazines of the time called it the Darth Vader of Detroit. And they were not wrong. Its success came as a surprise even to Buick. And when production ended in 1987, it instantly became legend. These days, it is one of the most collectible cars from the decade. But back then, it was the ultimate sleeper, a quiet assassin hiding behind a conservative grille. The Dodge Shelby Charger was the automotive equivalent of a gym rat hiding under a hoodie. You looked at it and thought, "Oh, that is cute." A small front-wheel drive coupe. Then you heard the name Shelby. That changed everything. Carroll Shelby, the same man behind the Cobra and the Mustang GT350, teamed up with Dodge to give this little car some bite. It had a turbocharged four-cylinder engine, sharper suspension, upgraded brakes, and a serious attitude. But it still looked like something your older cousin might drive to community college. The two-tone paint, racing stripes, and Shelby decals added some flair, but it did not scream performance, which was perfect. It let you ambush unsuspecting Camaros and Firebirds without breaking a sweat. On paper, the horsepower numbers were not massive, but in real-world driving it was light, nimble, and shockingly quick. The Shelby Charger proved that performance did not always need a V8 or rear-wheel drive. And because it was based on the humble Dodge Omni platform, people underestimated it constantly. That is what made it so special. A compact coupe that looked modest, drove hard, and had one of the most legendary names in American racing printed right on the trunk. The Chevrolet Citation X-11 was General Motors' attempt to turn oatmeal into a jalapeno. The original Citation was as bland as a beige minivan, a front-wheel drive box meant to replace aging compact sedans. No one looked twice at one. But someone at Chevrolet decided to stir the pot. They gave it sport suspension, performance tires, and a high-output V6 engine. Just like that, the X-11 was born. It had hood vents, alloy wheels, and a confident stripe kit. Just enough visual spice to raise an eyebrow. But people still assumed it was slow. That was their first mistake. On the road, the X-11 handled far better than its base model siblings and had enough torque to surprise much bigger cars off the line. It was not a Corvette, but it did not pretend to be. It was a grocery getter with a hidden mean streak. Inside, it still looked like the accountant's choice. But behind the wheel, it had a rebellious edge. GM never really pushed the X-11 hard in marketing, which made it all the more stealthy. Today, most people have forgotten it ever existed. But if you had one, or got beaten by one, you know exactly why it deserves a spot on this list. The Ford LTD-LX was not built for burnout contests. It looked like something your father's coworker would drive to a boring office park every day. But deep inside this mild-mannered sedan was the soul of a Mustang. That is because Ford gave it a 5.0-liter V8, the same engine used in the Mustang GT at the time. Combine that with upgraded suspension, quad shocks in the rear, and sportier handling, and suddenly this buttoned-up commuter car could dance. There were no flashy decals, no performance badging, and no wild spoilers. Just a V8 hum under a quiet suit and tie. To the average driver, it was just another LTD. But to enthusiasts, it was one of the greatest examples of factory-built sleepers in the 1980s. You could take it to church, then smoke a Camaro on the way home. And with just a little tuning, it became a seriously quick machine. Unfortunately, Ford only made it for 2 years. The world was not quite ready for a fast four-door in a time when sedans were still expected to be soft and slow. But those who owned an LTD-LX knew better. It was Detroit muscle dressed up like a middle manager. The Mercury Capri RS 5.0 was the Mustang's quieter twin. Built on the same Fox body platform, it shared most of the Mustang's performance parts: V8 engine, rear-wheel drive, aggressive gearing, but wore a more subtle face. While the Mustang grabbed headlines, the Capri snuck under the radar. It had a slightly different roofline, bubble hatch rear window, and a restrained design that did not scream, "Look at me." And that is what made it special. It was fast, balanced, and capable, but it did not need the spotlight. Owners loved it because it felt exclusive. The Mustang was everywhere. The Capri was not. When you pulled up to a stoplight, nobody assumed it had a 5.0 badge under the hood. That gave you the advantage. It had all the fun of a muscle car, without the expectations or the insurance premiums. The interior was nearly identical. The power numbers were the same. But the experience felt more personal, like you were in on a secret. Today, most people forget Mercury even made performance cars. But the Capri RS 5.0 is a perfect example of why that should change. A car with Mustang DNA cloaked in subtlety. The Pontiac 6000 STE was what happened when Pontiac tried to build a European sports sedan using an American family car as the foundation. On the outside, it looked like any other mid-1980s four-door commuter, square, upright, and sensible. But under the skin, it had ambitions. The STE, short for Special Touring Edition, came with performance-tuned suspension, four-wheel disc brakes, alloy wheels, and in later years, even all-wheel drive. It was one of the first American cars to feature a fully digital dashboard. That alone made it feel like a spaceship compared to its bland competition. But the real sleeper move came from how it drove. The handling was crisp. The ride was firm without being punishing. And the V6 under the hood gave it enough punch to surprise sportier-looking rivals. It was quiet, refined, and completely overlooked. While people drooled over Camaros and Corvettes, the 6000 STE quietly carved corners and cruised past slower traffic with ease. It had a stealthy confidence to it, like a high school valedictorian who also happened to be a black belt. You did not expect it to be fast. But it was. And in the era of badge-driven performance, that made it unforgettable to those who knew what they were looking at. The Dodge Spirit RT came out just past the edge of the 1980s, but it carried every ounce of late-decade attitude. It was built on engineering rooted in the late 1980s, and it showed. This thing looked like a basic rental car, a box on wheels, no flash, no edge, but under the hood was a turbocharged 2.2-liter inline-4 that packed a brutal punch, especially for a four-door economy sedan. It made over 200 horsepower and was paired with a 5-speed manual. That alone made it special. But what took it over the top was the Lotus-tuned suspension. Yes, Lotus. This car could corner, and it could outrun V8 Mustangs in stoplight sprints. People who lined up next to it had no idea what was about to happen. You would hear the turbo spool, see the front end lift slightly, and then it would vanish. In a time when performance was still largely associated with big coupes or imports, the Spirit RT made an unforgettable statement. It proved that real speed could come from the most unexpected place. And while its looks never impressed anyone, the feeling behind the wheel did. The Chrysler Conquest TS. I was a case of badge deception done right. It was really a Mitsubishi Starion in disguise, imported and rebadged by Chrysler to give American buyers a taste of turbocharged rear-wheel drive precision. This car looked like a miniature muscle car. Wide fenders, aggressive stance, and a low-slung profile. But most people did not know what it was. That gave it an edge. Under the hood was a turbocharged four-cylinder that delivered power in sharp, punchy bursts. It had independent suspension, limited slip differential, and a 5-speed manual gearbox that made driving it an event. The Conquest TSI had an import fighter spirit, nimble, tuned for handling, and capable of taking down more established performance names with less effort. Its cockpit was tight, filled with digital gauges and a sense of intention. You could feel that it was built by people who cared about balance and feedback. It was never flashy in the way a Corvette or a Trans Am was, but it held its own, and it earned its stripes with real enthusiasts. Today, it is rarely remembered in the pantheon of 1980s speed machines, but it absolutely should be, because the Conquest was more than a rebadge. It was a real-deal sports car hidden under a nameplate no one saw coming. The Mazda 626. Turbo was everything you wanted in a grown-up car that still knew how to misbehave. It was a mid-size sedan, polite in appearance and responsible in tone. But in the mid-1980s, Mazda decided to bolt on a turbocharger and let it play rough. The result was a car that handled like a compact, accelerated like a coupe, and still had 4 doors and a trunk for practicality. The 5-speed manual transmission made it feel alive in a way few sedans ever did. The turbo spooled up quickly, giving you instant torque without drama. It was smooth, but it was fast. Faster than anyone expected. Especially from a brand most people still thought of as quirky. The 626 Turbo had precise steering, sport-tuned suspension, and a chassis that felt European in character. It was the kind of car you could drive to work during the week and carve up back roads on the weekend. Most of your neighbors would have no clue what it was capable of. And that was part of the charm. No spoilers, no flashy stripes, just smart engineering wrapped in a grown-up shell. It flew under the radar then. And it still does now. But anyone who drove one remembers. The Toyota Cressida was the corporate cousin of the Supra, but it never wore that legacy on its sleeve. Instead, it played the long game. Quiet, smooth, refined. On the outside, the Cressida looked like a car built for dentists and professors, boxy, restrained, maybe even boring. But under the hood was a silky inline-6 engine paired with rear-wheel drive and a near 50-50 weight balance. It did not shout. It whispered confidence. Driving it felt like unlocking a secret level in a video game. Suddenly, this polite sedan responded like a sports car. The ride was composed, the handling was confident, and the straight six purred with effortless torque. It was not about burning rubber, it was about precision. And it came with top-tier build quality, soft touch materials, and a reputation for reliability that bordered on myth. In many ways, the Cressida was a Lexus before Lexus existed. It showed Toyota could make cars that went toe-to-toe with BMW and Mercedes without sacrificing comfort or quality. People who bought them knew what they were getting. Everyone else just assumed it was a fancy Camry. And that is why it is one of the greatest sleepers of the 1980s. Because it never had to prove itself. It just drove better than everything else and let the results speak for themselves. The Volvo 740. Turbo might be the last car anyone expected to leave a Mustang in its dust, but that was exactly its hidden talent. It looked like a refrigerator on wheels, boxy, practical, unapologetically Swedish. Safety was its headline, not speed. But under that squared-off hood lived a turbocharged inline-4 that turned this family hauler into a legitimate threat at stoplights. It had a rear-wheel drive layout, solid suspension, and when properly tuned, could run with the big dogs. The boost hit hard and fast. While most people assumed you were just out for groceries, you were actually out there humiliating sports cars twice the price. The best part? It held together like a tank. You could hammer the throttle all day and still drive it to the mountains in comfort. Inside, it was all business. Logical dash layout, upright seats, and one of the most indestructible interiors ever made. The 740 Turbo was the perfect example of a car that never tried to be cool, but ended up legendary because of it. Today, they are cult classics for good reason. Not just because of the boost, but because of the attitude. Fast, unflashy, and built like it was ready for the next ice age. The Audi 5000 Turbo was the car that quietly told the Germans, "We can do this too." It was not just a luxury sedan, it was a performance laboratory wearing a business suit. With a turbocharged 5-cylinder engine and the option of Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system, the 5000 Turbo was fast, refined, and ahead of its time. The design was sleek and aerodynamic, with flush glass and clean body lines that made it look like it had come from the future. And behind the wheel, it delivered. Turbo lag was real, but when the power arrived, it hit with a satisfying shove. The steering had weight, the brakes were confident, and the handling was sharp, especially with Quattro underfoot. The torque steer could be wild, but once you got a feel for it, the car felt like a machine with purpose. Inside, it felt modern. Plush seats, digital displays, and a cabin that prioritized the driver. But what really made it a sleeper was how quiet it all was. There was no shouting about horsepower, no wings, no stripes, just a fast, capable sedan that did everything right, until the media scandal of unintended acceleration cast a shadow over the entire lineup. Still, the 5000 Turbo was proof that Audi knew how to blend speed and sophistication, long before the rest of the world caught up. The Subaru XT Turbo looked like it had driven straight out of a science fiction novel, and honestly, that is what made it brilliant. With its wedge-shaped body, pop-up headlights, and digital dashboard that looked like a spaceship control panel, it was one of the most futuristic cars on the road in the 1980s. But underneath all the drama was a serious little sleeper. The XT Turbo came with a flat-4 turbocharged engine that delivered real punch, especially on the highway. It was also one of the most aerodynamic production cars of its time, and when paired with Subaru's all-wheel drive system, it had surprising grip and handling for something so strange-looking. People laughed at its shape, questioned its buttons, and dismissed it as another quirky Japanese experiment. But those who drove it knew the truth. This thing could move. It was lightweight, quick off the line, and planted through corners. Plus, it was comfortable. Subaru loaded it with tech and gave it a cabin that felt like an arcade machine. The Subaru XT Turbo was not mainstream. It was never meant to be. But that is exactly why it stood out, and exactly why it belongs on a list of forgotten legends. The Buick Somerset T-Type was short-lived, easily overlooked, and oddly delightful. It was not the fastest car on the road. It was not even the fastest in Buick's lineup. But it was a compact coupe with a surprising amount of character, and for a couple of years, it had something to prove. Built during a time when Buick was experimenting with its performance identity, the Somerset T-Type came with a fuel-injected V6 engine, a sporty suspension, and digital instrumentation that made it feel futuristic. The exterior design was smooth and rounded, with just enough angular edges to feel sharp for the era. Inside, it looked like a scaled-down spaceship. The dashboard lit up like a game console, and the leather-wrapped steering wheel felt oddly premium for a car its size. Most people had no idea it was a T-Type unless they spotted the subtle badging. And that was the point. It was a low-key performer, not a barnstormer, not a drag strip monster, but a car that had a little extra muscle, a little extra swagger, and a lot of charm. In today's world of over-the-top performance cars, the Somerset T-Type reminds us that subtlety can still be cool, and that forgotten cars are often the ones worth remembering. The Nissan Maxima SE of the mid-1980s was not just a family sedan. It was a wake-up call. Powered by a V6 engine and dubbed the four-door sports car, this Maxima was out to destroy the stereotype that sedans had to be slow and boring. And it worked. The SE version came with a manual transmission, sport-tuned suspension, and a growl that sounded like it belonged in something far meaner. On the outside, it looked responsible. Clean, no nonsense, and vaguely upscale. But on the road, it came alive. The V6 pulled hard. The steering was responsive. The chassis felt tight, and the car had a swagger that was hard to explain. It did not brag about speed. It just delivered it. Inside, the Maxima SE was filled with thoughtful details. Firm seats, driver-focused controls, and even voice alerts that felt high-tech at the time. Most people bought it because they needed a family car. Few realized they were getting a secret sports sedan, and that is exactly what made it a sleeper. The Maxima SE wore its performance lightly. No stripes, no spoilers, just speed, comfort, and confidence, all wrapped up in a car that could still pick up the kids from school. The Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe was the cooler, older cousin to the Mustang, quieter, more refined, and surprisingly fast when you least expected it. While most people were looking at the Mustang for their performance fix, the Thunderbird was quietly evolving into something sharper. From 1983 to 1988, the Turbo Coupe came equipped with a turbocharged 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine and, most importantly, independent rear suspension, which the Mustang would not get for decades. This meant that the Thunderbird handled with poise and delivered a balanced ride that most muscle cars of the time could not match. It had all the right performance pieces: a 5-speed manual gearbox, turbo boost gauges, and available anti-lock brakes. But it did not scream about it. Instead, it looked sophisticated. Smooth body lines, hidden headlights, and a grown-up vibe that made it feel like it belonged in an executive parking lot. Yet, when pushed, it delivered. The power was immediate, the handling tight, and the brakes confident. It was not about smoking tires at every red light. It was about grace under pressure. For those who knew, the Turbo Coupe was a driver's car in disguise. It never got the spotlight it deserved, but it absolutely earned its stripes. The Peugeot 505 Turbo was France's attempt to build a car that could take on the best from Germany, and in many ways, they nailed it. The 505 Turbo was rear-wheel drive, turbocharged, and shockingly well-balanced. It was not just quick, it was composed. With 150 horsepower from its turbocharged engine and a suspension tuned for both comfort and performance, it drove like a much more expensive European sedan. The interior was sleek and understated, with supportive seats and a clean dashboard layout that made you feel like you were in something special. It had room for 5, handled beautifully in corners, and provided a driving experience that was confident and engaging. Yet most Americans had no idea what they were looking at. The Peugeot badge did not carry the same weight in the United States, and the car's performance was often buried beneath its understated looks. But those who drove one, especially in its 5-speed manual configuration, knew they were in on a secret. This was a car that could keep pace with the BMW 3 Series or Audi 5000 on a twisty back road. It is almost completely forgotten now, but for a brief moment, Peugeot had a real contender. The 505 Turbo proved that sleepers did not just come from Detroit or Tokyo, they came from Paris too. The Mitsubishi Galant VR-4 prototype was never officially sold in the United States during the 1980s, but it was lurking just beneath the surface. Engineers were hard at work building a rally-inspired sedan that would later become a cult favorite in the 1990s. But in the late 1980s, test builds and early development models were already floating around in Mitsubishi's secret garages. What they were building was special. A turbocharged 4-cylinder engine paired with all-wheel drive and 4-wheel steering. Yes, 4-wheel steering. It handled like nothing else in its class. Early prototypes hinted at what was coming, a practical 4-door with the soul of a race car. It was built to compete in World Rally Championship events but disguised as a humble sedan. Nobody saw it coming. The production version would eventually arrive in the early 1990s and make a name for itself, but the roots of the Galant VR-4 were buried in the late 1980s. If you were one of the few who saw an early test mule or drove a gray market import, you knew this was something different. Something that moved like a sports car but looked like a commuter. The real tragedy is how close this legend came to breaking through during the 1980s. Had it landed just a little earlier, the VR-4 could have redefined what Americans expected from a family car. The Chevrolet Celebrity? Eurosport VR was General Motors' attempt at giving their everyday family sedan a shot of espresso, and the result was a peculiar, punchy oddball that somehow worked. At first glance, it looked like your average Midwestern grocery getter, but look closer and you would see blacked-out trim, subtle ground effects, and that elusive VR badge. Under the hood sat a high-output V6 engine, and under the skin was stiffer suspension tuned for actual cornering, not just coasting. The steering was tighter, the response was better, and while it never made magazine covers, it surprised a lot of skeptics. It was never a full-blown sports sedan, but it also never claimed to be. Instead, it existed in a strange but compelling gray area. It said, "I have a job interview at 9 and a twisty back road to tackle by 5. The Eurosport VR was limited in numbers, which only adds to its mystique today. It was not flashy, not famous, but it had the right upgrades to make the driving experience feel intentional. And for a car that usually got dismissed as rental fodder, that was a huge win. It might not have earned respect back then, but today, it is one of the rare sleepers from the 1980s that feels truly undercover." The Oldsmobile Cutlass Calais. 442 was not the rear-wheel drive muscle car everyone assumed it was. This one was front-wheel drive, compact, and quietly mean. Between 1985 and 1987, Oldsmobile slapped the legendary 442 badge on a car built for a new era. It came with a high-output quad-4 engine, a rev-happy 4-cylinder with real bite. Mated to a 5-speed manual and equipped with sport suspension, this version of the 442 did not need 8 cylinders to make an impression. The styling was sharp for its size. Subtle body cladding and understated badging gave it just enough presence without screaming for attention, and inside it had sport seats, a driver-focused layout, and a sense of purpose. Most people expected something tame. What they got was a compact car that could hang with bigger, louder competition. Sure, it was not the traditional muscle car experience, but that was the point. It represented the shift in performance thinking during the 1980s. Lighter, smaller, smarter. The Cutlass Calais 442 might have upset purists, but to those who actually drove it, it was something different. A leaner, sneakier version of an icon. And in the world of sleeper cars, that counts for a lot. The Plymouth Turismo Duster was scrappy, simple, and just the kind of turbocharged chaos the 1980s did so well. Built off a lightweight front-wheel drive platform, this hatchback was not flashy. It was hungry. With the optional Duster Performance package, you got firmer suspension, sharper steering, and a turbocharged engine that made the little thing howl. The boost came on hard, catching unsuspecting drivers completely off guard. It was the kind of car that felt faster than the spec sheet suggested, especially because of its minimal weight. There was no elegance, no prestige, just a lot of noise and surprising grip. And yet, because it wore a Plymouth badge and had a quirky hatchback profile, most people ignored it completely, which made it the perfect sleeper. It was raw, occasionally unpredictable, and genuinely fun. That was its charm. In an era where everyone was chasing refinement, the Turismo Duster reminded people that rough edges sometimes made the drive more exciting. The Isuzu Impulse Turbo was what happened when a Japanese carmaker teamed up with an Italian design genius and a British suspension expert. Styled by Giorgetto Giugiaro and tuned by Lotus, the Impulse Turbo looked like a concept car and handled like something far more expensive. It had a turbocharged engine under the hood and rear-wheel drive, delivering a driving experience that most compact cars simply could not touch. It was sleek and low-slung, with wide pop-up headlights and an interior full of 1980s sci-fi charm. But few people paid it much attention. It did not come from a flashy brand. It did not advertise its speed, and that made it a true sleeper. The turbo power arrived with a snap, and the Lotus suspension made corners feel sharp and tight. It felt exotic, but it came with the reliability of Japanese engineering. Quietly, it was one of the most well-balanced and best-looking performance coupes of its time, and nearly no one remembers it. The Renault Fuego Turbo was one of those rare French cars that somehow snuck into the American market during the 1980s. and did it with unexpected flair. Its styling was unmistakably French, sleek, curved, and borderline cartoonish in a decade full of squares. It looked like it belonged in a science fiction film, not a suburban driveway. But hidden beneath that eccentric exterior was a turbocharged four-cylinder engine that gave it a surprising edge. Front-wheel drive, modest weight, and a punchy power band meant it could out-hustle cars that cost a lot more. Drivers expecting fluff were often caught off guard by how responsive and eager it felt on the open road. The cabin matched the theme: wild seat fabrics, deep bucket seats, and a dashboard filled with digital flourishes. It was high-tech for the time, even if a bit temperamental. And yes, the reliability was exactly what you would expect from a 1980s French import, which is to say, unpredictable at best. But the Fuego Turbo had soul. It made no apologies for being strange. It was different, bold, and oddly exciting. And that is exactly what made it special. While most people overlooked it, or laughed at it, it had just enough speed to wipe that smirk off their faces. A true sleeper, hiding behind a smile. The Mazda RX-7 GSL-SE was what happened when Mazda decided to add maturity to madness. Earlier, RX-7s were known for their raw feel, loud, twitchy, and thrilling. But the GSL-SE took that rotary chaos and dressed it in refinement. It came with fuel injection, upgraded suspension, bigger brakes, and a sense of composure that earlier models lacked. Still, it kept the spirit alive. That lightweight rotary engine, smooth as silk and screaming at high RPMs, made it a true driver's car. The power delivery was seamless. There was no brute force, just a steady, elegant climb. On twisty roads, the car felt like it was reading your mind. The near-perfect weight distribution and low ride height meant every input counted. It danced, and yet people still underestimated it. To the casual eye, it looked like a modest import coupe. But to those who knew, who felt that rotary hum climbed past 7,000 RPM, it was unforgettable. There were no loud badges or wild wings. It did not need them. The GSL-SE was stealthy speed, the gentleman's choice in a crowd of screamers. That is what made it a sleeper. The Mercury Lynx RS was about as plain as a car could look until you got behind the wheel. Based on the Ford Escort, the Lynx RS was treated to performance upgrades that turned it from forgettable to genuinely fun. With a sport-tuned suspension, alloy wheels, and a peppy engine, it felt sharper than it had any right to. The handling was tight, the weight was low, and it had just enough attitude to make daily driving feel like something more. It was cheap to own, cheap to run, and surprisingly rewarding to drive hard. Most people ignored it because of its nameplate. But for those who gave it a chance, the Lynx RS earned its place as one of the most overlooked hot hatches of the era. The AMC Hornet Sportabout was not just a station wagon, it was a style statement. Launched in the early 1970s, the Sportabout was AMC's answer to a world that needed utility, but craved flair. With its compact size and distinctive profile, it stood apart from the bulky wagons of the past. And then, in an unexpected twist, Gucci got involved. Yes, that Gucci. The fashion house teamed up with AMC to design a limited edition Sportabout complete with designer interiors, pinstriping, and branded badging. It was bold, it was bizarre, and it worked, at least for a little while. The Sportabout was reliable, versatile, and surprisingly fun to drive. Families loved it. Urban professionals appreciated the compact utility, but by the end of the 1970s, the wagon era was fading. SUVs were rising. Flash was no longer enough. Still, the Hornet Sportabout remains one of the few cars that can say it had real fashion cred. It may not be in museums or car shows, but in the memories of those who drove it, it is unforgettable. The 1985 Yugo GF made headlines as the cheapest new car in America. But cheap came with a price, and the Yugo paid dearly. Built in the former Yugoslavia and imported with bold promises, it was meant to give cost-conscious buyers an entry into car ownership. But almost everything about the Yugo felt like a compromise too far. The engine was noisy, the transmission clunky, and interior trim came loose with the slightest touch. Reviewers described it as toy-like, unstable, and barely roadworthy. On the highway, it struggled to keep up. On hills, it begged for mercy. Repairs were frequent and frustrating, and many new owners regretted the purchase before their first oil change. It became a late-night comedy punchline and the butt of every bad car joke for decades. Some cars fade into obscurity. The Yugo earned infamy. It proved that cutting costs without care leads to one destination: failure. The 1985 Yugo GF made headlines as the cheapest new car in America. But cheap came with a price, and the Yugo paid dearly. Built in the former Yugoslavia and imported with bold promises, it was meant to give cost-conscious buyers an entry into car ownership. But almost everything about the Yugo felt like a compromise too far. The engine was noisy, the transmission clunky, and interior trim came loose with the slightest touch. Reviewers described it as toy-like, unstable, and barely roadworthy. On the highway, it struggled to keep up. On hills, it begged for mercy. Repairs were frequent and frustrating, and many new owners regretted the purchase before their first oil change. It became a late-night comedy punchline and the butt of every bad car joke for decades. Some cars fade into obscurity. The Yugo earned infamy. It proved that cutting costs without care leads to one destination: failure. The 1967 Pontiac GTO was the kind of car that made your heart race before your foot even touched the gas pedal. With its wide stance, stacked headlights, and sleek hood scoops, it carried the kind of muscular elegance that turned a street into a runway. It was bold without being loud, aggressive without being crude. The body had just enough curve to catch the light and just enough edge to make you stare. This was the peak of Pontiac's design language. Every line meant something. Under the hood, it was no slouch. A powerful V8 engine delivered the growl to back up the look, launching drivers down the quarter mile and into legend. But what made the GTO special was its dual personality. It was as comfortable rolling through a small-town parade as it was at a midnight streetlight showdown. Inside, the bucket seats hugged you. The wood-grain dash, the rally gauges, the heavy steering wheel, they all reminded you that you were in something serious. The 1967 model marked the last of the first generation, and many consider it the most refined version. Not just a muscle car, but a masterpiece of proportion, presence, and pure Pontiac pride. The 1983 Honda Prelude was supposed to usher in a new chapter of Japanese sportiness, but it stumbled at the starting line. This was the first-generation Prelude to reach American shores, and expectations were high. Honda had already built a reputation for quality, value, and clever engineering. But the Prelude, despite its sporty looks and pop-up headlights, lacked the excitement buyers were promised. The engine was weak, the acceleration was slow, and reliability, usually Honda's strongest suit, suffered from teething problems in the new design. Suspension components wore out quickly, interior trim rattled, and while the car handled decently in corners, it felt gutless in straight-line performance. It looked like a sports car. It acted like an underpowered commuter. Competing against more powerful coupes and hot hatches, the Prelude fell flat. It did have its fans, mostly for its futuristic dash and tidy size, but even loyal Honda buyers expected more. Later generations would fix these flaws and turn the Prelude into a beloved icon. But this first outing left a bland impression. Today, the original Prelude is rarely remembered, not because it was terrible, but because it was underwhelming, a rare stumble from a company that usually got it right. The 1954 Kaiser Darrin was America's first production fiberglass sports car, arriving just ahead of the Chevrolet Corvette, and it looked like nothing else on the road. Its most striking feature? The doors. They did not swing open. They slid forward into the front fenders, vanishing like a magic trick. Designed by Howard Darrin, the car blended European style with American ambition. The long nose, low profile, and elegant curves made it feel more like an art piece than a machine. Under the hood was a modest Willys engine, Not a powerhouse, but enough to move its featherlight fiberglass frame with ease. But performance was not the point. The Darren was about design, about flair, about doing something no one else dared. Only 435 were produced before Kaiser shut down its car division, making the Darren a rare gem in the American sports car world. Its soft grille, sweeping lines, and sliding doors made it unforgettable. Today, collectors hunt for them like buried treasure, and those who find one know they own a piece of innovation wrapped in style. The Kaiser Darren was not built to dominate, it was built to dazzle. The Ford Gran Torino Elite tried to be something bigger. Styled like a Thunderbird, priced more affordably, and built with comfort in mind, it represented the rise of the personal luxury coupe. It was not just a car, it was a mood on wheels. With a long hood, formal roofline, and opera windows, it had presence that demanded attention without ever raising its voice. It looked like the kind of car a television detective would drive, and for a while, it actually was. The Starsky and Hutch connection gave it street cred, but in real life, the Elite was all about cruising, not chasing. Under the hood, it offered V8 power that could move the heavy body with ease, but it was never about winning races. It was about gliding, about arriving somewhere and stepping out like you belonged. Inside, there were thick pillow-tufted seats, deep, soft carpeting, and dials that felt like they belonged in a cocktail lounge more than a dashboard. Everything was built for comfort and quiet. You sank into this car. You did not just sit. Drivers wanted to feel important behind the wheel, and the Gran Torino Elite delivered that feeling without breaking the bank. It was aspirational without being arrogant. But personal luxury had a short shelf life. Gas prices spiked, parking lots shrank, people began eyeing smaller cars with practicality in mind. Style gave way to efficiency, and the Elite, for all its smooth charm, began to feel like yesterday's dream. By the late 1970s, the Elite was gone, replaced by newer ideas that promised less flair but better mileage. Still, for a few golden years, it made people feel special. It gave everyday drivers a taste of elegance. And that feeling, the sense of being worth something more, is hard to forget. The 1971 Plymouth GTX4 40+6 convertible was the kind of car that made people double take, because nobody expected luxury and raw muscle to mix so well. Only 30 of these convertibles were built with the legendary 446-barrel engine, making them a rare breed even during the height of the muscle era. The car combined performance engineering with upscale trim. You got a heavy-hitting V8 with triple two-barrel carburetors and enough torque to light up the tires on command. But you also got a convertible roof, premium interior touches, and a smooth ride that made long drives feel effortless. It was the muscle car for someone who wanted it all: speed, power, and open-air cruising. The styling was aggressive but refined, with a wide stance, hood scoops, and bold badging that told everyone this was not just a regular GTX. Inside, it had wood-grain panels, comfortable bucket seats, and a sense of control that wrapped around the driver. Most buyers passed it up in favor of hardtops or other more common trims, but the few who checked the right boxes got something unforgettable. The 1971 GTX 440+6 convertible remains one of the most luxurious ways to unleash 6 barrels of fury. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 was not built to whisper, it was built to roar. With its broad shoulders, twin racing stripes, and domed hood, it looked like it had just launched out of a drag strip, even while parked. The lines were clean, muscular, and full of tension, like a predator caught mid-stride. But it was not just about looks. Under that hood sat the legendary 454 cubic inch V8, producing enough raw horsepower to rattle the pavement and your spine. It was one of the most powerful engines ever dropped into a factory muscle car, and yet it never looked over-designed. The Chevelle's beauty came from balance, brutal performance wrapped in understated style. Chrome accents added just the right sparkle, while the blackout grille gave it attitude. Inside, it was business first. Bucket seats, a horseshoe shifter, and a dash full of gauges that reminded you this was no Sunday cruiser. The 1970 Chevelle SS was peak muscle, but it wore that power with confidence, not flash. It was the kind of car you respected from a distance and fell in love with up close. A brawler in a tailored suit. The 1986 Pontiac 6000 STE AWD was the future according to Pontiac. Digital dash, all-wheel drive, electronic everything. On paper, it was packed with features no other sedan in its class could touch. But in practice, it was a complicated, unreliable mess. The electronics glitched. The AWD system was clunky, and repairs were expensive. Drivers who expected high-tech harmony were met with blinking warnings and mechanical headaches. Pontiac billed the 6000 STE as a European-style performance sedan, but it had none of the refinement. It felt heavy. It felt overworked. It felt like technology running just ahead of its own understanding. While it did offer all-wheel drive in an era that was still new to the idea, it lacked the polish and consistency needed to make that innovation stick. The 6000 STE was not a total failure, but it came too soon and delivered too little. The Chevrolet Monza. 2+2 was a fastback with dreams bigger than its time allowed. Inspired by the sleek shapes of the Corvette, it carried curvy lines, low-profile styling, and the promise of performance. And with an optional V8 under the hood, it could deliver. For a brief moment, it looked like Chevrolet had found a sweet spot between compact practicality and sports car thrill. But then, the reality of the era hit hard. Smog regulations choked performance, safety demands weighed it down, and the same V8 that once excited buyers began to feel sluggish under pressure. Still, the Monza 2+2 had a style all its own. It turned heads with its dramatic angles and offered something that felt different from the boxier compacts around it. Car lovers remember the feeling of sitting low to the ground, looking out over that long, sloping hood. The car whispered rebellion, even if the engine could only manage a mutter. It did not last long, but the Monza 2+2 remains a symbol of ambition. What happens when big ideas meet hard limitations? And sometimes, even half-speed dreams are worth remembering. The 1982 Chrysler Imperial wanted to bring old-school luxury into the digital age, but the transition was rocky. On the outside, it wore the sharp lines, boxy silhouette, and gleaming chrome trim that screamed old-money prestige. It looked like something a retired executive would drive to a private golf club in Palm Springs. But on the inside, it was trying hard to be the future. Chrysler loaded the Imperial with one of the earliest digital dashboards, voice alerts, and a fuel injection system controlled by a primitive onboard computer. Unfortunately, none of it worked the way it should have. The electronic dash flickered. The fuel injection system was erratic. The engine stumbled and surged, leaving both drivers and mechanics confused and frustrated. At a time when Chrysler desperately needed a win, the Imperial felt like a bloated experiment. Reliability took a hit. Gas mileage was poor. And the ride, while soft, felt disconnected from the road, like floating on a sofa bolted to a shopping cart. Chrysler marketed the Imperial as a return to elegance, even offering special Frank Sinatra editions, complete with branded cassettes. But all the names and styling in the world could not hide the clunky mechanics and aging foundation underneath. Sales were slow, and buyers were not impressed. In trying to bridge the past and the future, the Imperial ended up stuck in a limbo of unfulfilled promises. It was a luxury car that no longer understood what luxury meant. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 was the gentleman's muscle car, refined on the surface but ready to throw a punch under pressure. Only 678 were built, and everyone was a carefully balanced blend of speed and style. Most people think of Buick as quiet, comfortable, and conservative. The GSX shattered that image. Painted in bright yellow or white with black racing stripes, it looked like a street fighter in a dinner jacket. But what really made it special was under the hood, a 455 cubic inch V8 that made monstrous torque and could leave most competitors gasping. The Stage 1 performance package added even more muscle, tightening the suspension, boosting the compression, and turning it into a true track threat. Inside, it was pure Buick. Comfortable seats, Elegant trim, a dash that looked like it belonged in a luxury lounge. But mash the throttle and the GSX came alive. It was not built in massive numbers. It was not plastered across every magazine cover. But those who knew, knew. The GSX Stage 1 was the car that proved Buick could play the muscle game and win with class. The 1959 Cadillac Eldorado was not just a car. It was a spectacle on wheels. It had tail fins that reached toward the sky, sweeping backward like wings ready for liftoff. At the end of each fin sat bullet-shaped tail lights, glowing like afterburners. The chrome dripped off the body in every direction, gleaming from the massive front grille, the trim, the mirrors, even the door handles. Inside, it was more like a lounge than a vehicle. Plush seats, bright colors, and enough polished metal to blind you at sunset. The dashboard stretched wide, filled with buttons and dials that felt like airplane controls. It was long, it was loud, it was unapologetically American. Designed during the height of the jet age, the 1959 Eldorado was Cadillac's boldest vision of what luxury and modernity looked like. But under all that shine was serious engineering. A V8 engine gave it power to match the spectacle. It rode smooth, glided even. Driving it was not about getting somewhere. It was about being seen. And seen you were. Pulling up in a 1959 Eldorado felt like stepping onto a red carpet. It was everything big, bold, and beautiful about the post-war dream, on 4 gleaming white wall tires. The Dodge Aspen RT was a car with an identity crisis. On one hand, it wanted to be a muscle sedan, packed with racing stripes, spoilers, and bold colors. On the other hand, it was built during an era where muscle was in decline. Released in the mid-1970s, the Aspen RT looked the part. It had aggressive styling, wide tires, and a V8 under the hood. But new emission standards and rising gas prices dulled its performance. The result was a car that promised thunder, but delivered a growl. Still, it carved out a niche. Families who wanted a sporty-looking ride without breaking the bank saw value in the Aspen. Teenagers loved the flash, and for a while it stood out in a crowd of increasingly tame sedans. But mechanical issues, recalls, and competition from more refined imports chipped away at its appeal. The RT trim disappeared quietly, overshadowed by faster and better-built machines. Yet it remains frozen in time as a brave, if flawed, attempt to keep the muscle dream alive. The Aspen RT was not perfect, but it had heart, and sometimes heart is all a car needs to be remembered. The 1981 DeLorean DMC-12 looked like it drove straight out of a science fiction film, and in some ways, it did. Its stainless steel body and gull-wing doors made it instantly iconic, turning heads even while parked. But under the surface, it was a troubled machine, underpowered, overpriced, difficult to manufacture. The Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 engine made just over 100 horsepower, laughable for a sports car. Quality control was a nightmare, and early models were plagued with electrical gremlins, loose panels, and poorly fitted parts. Door seals leaked, dashboards warped. Then came the scandal. Company founder John DeLorean was arrested in a cocaine sting operation, and suddenly the car's futuristic gleam turned into tabloid fodder. Production halted, and the dream unraveled. Despite its later fame in pop culture, the DMC-12 was a commercial disaster. It failed to meet its lofty goals and left behind a warehouse of unsold ambition. Today, people remember the car more for its movie legacy than its actual performance on the road. It is a symbol of vision, failure, and what happens when style moves faster than substance. The 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake was not just rare, it was one of one. Only a single prototype was ever built, and it was wild even by Carroll Shelby standards. From the outside, it looked like a typical GT 500 Mustang, but under the hood was a full-on racing engine borrowed from the legendary GT 40, an all-out 427 cubic inch monster built for Le Mans. Shelby built it to test tires for Goodyear, pushing the car to speeds over 170 miles per hour during brutal endurance runs, and it did it without breaking a sweat. The car was fast, yes, but it was also surprisingly composed, elegant even. The Super Snake carried all the signature Shelby styling cues: hood scoops, racing stripes, aggressive stance, but it was the powertrain that set it apart. Shelby wanted to build a limited run, but the price would have been too high for most buyers. The dream ended at one. That single Super Snake now sits as one of the most valuable Mustangs on Earth. It is not just a car, it is a legend that almost happened. The 1948 Tucker 48, also known as the Tucker Torpedo, looked like it came from a future we never quite reached. Its sleek teardrop body was decades ahead of its time, with curves that flowed like water and a center-mounted third headlight that turned with the steering wheel. Just standing next to it felt like being part of a science fiction story. Built by visionary Preston Tucker, this car was not just beautiful, it was revolutionary. It had a rear-mounted engine, pop-out safety windshields, and a padded dashboard, all in an era when most cars were still slabs of metal with wheels. But the most striking thing was how it looked. Low, long, and impossibly smooth, the Tucker 48 made every other car on the road seem outdated. Only 51 were ever built before the company was crushed by financial scandal and corporate resistance. But those 51 cars? They became legends. Not because of what they were, but because of what they could have been. The Tucker was beauty wrapped in bravery, a symbol of ambition that flew too close to the sun. And for collectors and dreamers alike, it still represents one of the boldest, most beautiful what-ifs in automotive history. The Dodge Dart Swinger was all attitude packed into a compact frame. While the base Dart was known as a sensible, dependable car, the Swinger trim brought something extra, something fun. It was a two-door coupe with just enough flash to make teenagers turn their heads and parents quietly shake theirs. The vinyl roof, racing stripes, and loud colors were made to stand out. It was not trying to be a muscle car, but it borrowed just enough swagger to feel like one. With engine options that gave it a little bite, the Swinger held its own on the road. Affordable, customizable, and easy to maintain, it quickly became a favorite among younger drivers. For a few golden years, it was everywhere, at drive-ins, outside burger joints, and lined up at local high schools. But as the 1970s wore on, tastes shifted. Insurance rates went up, gas prices soared, and the fun, flashy Swinger quietly disappeared. Still, it left its mark. It was a car that let regular people feel just a little cooler, a little faster, and a lot more alive. Those who drove it remember every ride, and those who missed out still wish they had taken the wheel. The 1980 Chevrolet Citation was General Motors' first big push into front-wheel drive, an effort to modernize its lineup and fight off foreign competition. But the launch was rushed, and the cracks showed almost immediately. Brake failures, rusted bodies, suspensions that collapsed under pressure, transmission issues dogged the early models, and misaligned steering columns made handling feel like guesswork. The Citation came out strong in sales, but quickly earned a reputation for unreliability. It was boxy, yes, but that was not the problem. The problem was that it felt unfinished. Cheap materials, inconsistent quality, and a driving experience that never inspired confidence. GM had marketed it as innovative, practical, and perfectly American. But buyers soon found themselves stuck with cars that shuddered, squeaked, and stalled. Lawsuits piled up, recalls followed, and the goodwill dried up fast. It even became a punchline in late-night comedy, symbolizing Detroit's worst instincts. What should have been a new chapter for Chevrolet became a footnote of frustration. The Citation did not just fail, it taught an entire generation not to trust promises stamped in chrome. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona was not built to be pretty, it was built to win. With its massive aerodynamic nose cone and towering rear wing, it looked like something out of a science fiction film. But every inch of it was designed for one purpose: dominate NASCAR. Just 503 were made to meet homologation requirements, and Dodge stuffed each one with a big V8 and a mission. At top speed, it was untouchable. The wing helped keep it glued to the track, and the pointed nose cut through the air like a missile. It was the first NASCAR car to break 200 miles per hour in competition. That made history. And the street version, just as wild. Dodge sold it to the public, knowing full well it would only appeal to the bravest buyers. It was long, it was loud, and it could not go anywhere without turning heads. But the Daytona was never meant for subtlety. It was meant to race, to win, and to stand apart. Today, it is one of the most iconic and rarest muscle cars ever built. A car that broke the rules, bent the wind, and left everything else behind in the dust. If any of these forgotten sleepers took you by surprise, share your story below. Hit like if it brought back memories, and subscribe to find more legends that flew under the radar.